Good morning, everyone. I hope you are all keeping well, and welcome to this, the first of the latest series of Back to webinars. Today, talking about all things Brexit. I hope you'll find this of interest. I know we have sent out a number of communications to you about what's been happening with Brexit, a few links through to the DCMS website and so on, but I still get the impression that it's a bit of a mystery. If you're like me, you've tended to let the Brexit issue deal with itself almost at a governmental level and felt, well, you know, we're a UK business with UK trade. It's not going to touch us very much at all. But when you do get into the detail, you think, actually, do you know, there are a number of things here that we need to look at. And I think one of the most noticeable examples of the impact of Brexit hit us not 4 or 5 months, 4 or 5 weeks ago, when all of a sudden we found imports of certain amusement machines from the United States were suddenly going to be impacted with a 25% tariff. Well, we were able to sort that one out. Well, say we, that one sorted itself out after a bit of lobbying, when the UK government, now having the ability to do so, decided to rescind that particular retaliatory tariff in relation to products coming into the UK, which was good news. But it is a very good example of some of the things that will happen and can happen as a result of us leaving the European Union at the back end of last year. And to discuss these things, I've got a very good panel with me today, who hopefully will be able to answer all of your questions. And I'll introduce them in a minute, but just a little bit of housekeeping first. It's not that the oxygen is going to drop from the ceiling or you have to exit over the wings. This is simply just to point you to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there. None of the panelists can see you. You won't have the ability, as in other Zoom calls, to raise a hand or wave at us at all. You really will need to use that Q&A button if you want to get our attention and ask a question of any of the panelists. What I'm hoping to do during the course of the hour that we have until 11:30 is to just really have a bit of a conversation about some of the things that might be relevant to us. But before we do that, let me just introduce our panelists, some of whom you will know. Quentin Stock from Reflex Gaming. I'm sure many of you will know very, very well indeed, and I'm sure some of you might have bought some of your products from him, and hopefully will be able to do so very soon as we move forward. Likewise, Justin Burke at Sega, a very well-known name, of course, Sega. Lovely picture of Sonic the Hedgehog there. Thank you, Justin, just to remind us where he comes from. Justin, obviously very interested in that tariff issue that I mentioned just a minute ago. We also have with us, thank you very much, Kieran O'Keefe, who is the Secretary General of Euromat, and he's sitting in Brussels at the moment. Thank you for joining us, Kieran. Obviously, with a European perspective, will help us understand, I think, some of the thinking that has been applied during the negotiations and got us to where we are. And finally, we have 3 representatives from the Home Office. We have Kenny White, no relation, David Ramsbottom, or otherwise known as Superman, and Karen Joint, who we've met previously and have got a great deal of knowledge around, in particular, some of the rules that are going to be in place for employing EU nationals in the UK. So thank you all very much for joining us. I'm sure you're getting a very large virtual round of applause by our guests today. I'm going to start off the session by inviting Kieran just to say a few words, if I may. Kieran, I mean, you've obviously been watching the whole negotiation towards Brexit very, very carefully. I just wondered if you might just be able to frame today's webinar with a couple of observations about kind of how we got here and what you think the kind of political consequences of Brexit are going to be.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I suppose that's an opening question that could be answered in a few minutes or a number of hours or days potentially. So the history of where we got to now, I probably won't go into in too much detail, but the point at which we're at is, of course, the UK has left after a fairly long period of time, as I'm sure you're all aware from the last couple of years, and there is a trade agreement in place between the EU and the UK. I think the thing is about that trade agreement is it's still relatively narrow in scope, even though it runs to more than 1,000 pages in length. And so I think the important thing to bear in mind, well, certainly from a Brussels perspective, is that people in Brussels don't really see the Brexit agreement as the end of anything. It's more the beginning. Obviously, the UK has been deeply integrated with the European economy for several decades. There is a huge amount of shared law. It's very difficult to unpick that in any meaningful way over a short period of time. So there is an agreement, but nevertheless, because the scope is still fairly narrow, there will be a need for many, many more years of negotiation on various different matters. We've seen that in the last couple of weeks with an initial adequacy decision from the European Commission on Data Protection, for example. There will be more adequacy decisions probably in other areas of European law, or not in some cases, which also brings its own challenges with it.
Can you just explain that concept of adequacy, Kieran? Because it is relevant, as you say, when GDPR and stuff, because that law will still be applying in the UK.
Yeah, so an adequacy decision is what the Commission does with third countries, where there is a need to have some kind of element of mutual recognition, let's say, so you can allow free trade in that particular area. So it applies in the area of data protection. They also apply in various areas, for example, of financial services, which again for the UK were very important. So I'm sure they'll be seeking to strike these adequacy decisions over a period of time in certain areas of law. The thing is about adequacy decisions is that they're very uncertain because the Commission has a lot of unilateral power just to withdraw them if it has a feeling that adequacy is not merited. So it gives a tremendous amount of power to the Commission. Getting them in place is obviously very important, obviously for trade between the UK and the EU. But of course, you know, Brexit and the future down the road is also going to be probably very political. So I think kind of periodic periods of disagreement or disruption between the EU and the UK is probably quite likely, because Brexit is quite a unique situation. You know, normally relations between the EU and third countries are about a gradual coming together. Brexit is a very slow and in many ways painful coming apart, and that's a very strange political dynamic in trade relations which doesn't really exist anywhere else on the planet. So, you know, I guess Brexit, it's a cliche to talk about uncharted territory. It continues to be uncharted territory, I think, and you know, the next, it's not just a couple of years, but you know, for the foreseeable future, it will be a very different type of relationship between the UK and its European partners.
Thank you very much for that, Kieran. It's really interesting, and I think that is a very good analogy to use, the taking apart of something that's been focused always on a coming together. So yeah, I think uncharted territory is not a hyperbolic phrase to use in relation to what we can expect to see over the coming months and years. And the second thing I took away from what you said, and I thought was really interesting, was the continued negotiations over things that will still have an impact in the UK, and we will still need to be alive to. Otherwise, we'll miss them and get caught. In terms of trade, what do you think the EU's attitude is to trading with the UK? I mean, still our largest trading partner, clearly a massive market for UK companies, and still a significant market for EU companies trading here. But you get, certainly in the British press, this sort of, there's almost a kind of almost a nationalism, you know, sort of like, you know, we're now on our own, we'll do it our way, we're going to trade with the rest of the world. And you feel like the EU has suddenly become less important as a trading bloc. Well, what's the attitude over there to trade?
Yeah, I think it's much, obviously, it's probably won't surprise you to hear that it's a bit more pragmatic. So indeed, there is a certain, there's a media-driven narrative in the UK, which is probably not present in other countries. I think obviously there's a genuine sadness in many national capitals to see the UK leave, but I think that's led to resignation that the UK is now a third country. And I think the EU is pretty much focused on, okay, we try to find ways to make this relationship work, while at the same time not undermining the integrity of the internal market, which is obviously a massive project of economic and political significance to the EU. I mean, from the UK's point of view, you know, so much of trade is driven by geographical proximity. That's the reality. Most countries trade a lot with the countries that are very close to them. So it's very difficult to see that at any point in the future, the EU will not be, you know, a significant, if not the most significant trading partner for the UK. And that just has certain realities to it, because most, trade barriers globally are not tariffs, they're non-tariff barriers, so differences in regulation. So for those areas of regulation where the UK was integrated, on a practical point of view, it's difficult to see that the UK is going to be able to diverge substantially in the future without incurring quite significant costs for its own businesses. So that means, realistically, that the regulation that's going to be framed in Brussels is still going to be highly relevant for UK business, because the UK, in many cases, is still going to have to be a rule taker, and now is no longer a rule maker, because it's not inside those negotiations trying to frame them at the point that they are created. It's going to have to deal with them once they're already out the system. So I think many UK businesses obviously are scaling up, in fact, their capacity to engage in Brussels for this very reason. They don't any longer have, in many cases, what were highly competent civil servants sitting in Brussels, some of the best actually foreign diplomats in many cases, this is widely accepted, negotiating on their behalf. That's now gone. So businesses themselves, in fact, probably have to lean in a little bit more into discussions than they have done in the past.
Very good news for Interrail, of course.
Complexity generally for companies like us, and also trade associations is I'm afraid probably a good thing. Yeah.
Can I turn to you, Justin and Quentin, please? I mean, this business of trade. I just wondered if, two things really. I mean, have you experienced any trading difficulties as we've been through the exit process? Obviously, we were in a transition period for 12 odd months last year, and having now left. And what are your business's plans for your trading relationships? And I know you have them both in EU and around the world. Perhaps I can come to you first, Sega, Justin, because Sega is a global company. How is it responded to Brexit?
Yeah, so far, obviously, trade is limited due to the COVID situation. So there's not been billions of containers leaving us to go to Europe, unfortunately. But Europe is a significant section of our business. A good third of our business goes to Europe every year. Prior to Brexit last year, we were kind of understanding and told that going forward in 2021, that the logistics will be not hugely different to how they were previously. The reality, as we now find out in this year, having done some shipping, that's not true at all. And shipping into Europe is now, it's more difficult, it's more administration, it's not as straightforward as it was, there's some more costs. So the reality is it is different, and it's not as easy as it was. It's not unsurmountable, but the reality is, yes, it's not as easy as it was. It just adds time, cost, money to that process.
Yeah. And do you think that, I mean, one of the things obviously that concerned a lot of people, and we've seen lots of news reports on this, is about lead times. Do you think it's just probably added a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever to lead times? So you'll be looking for orders needing to come in a bit earlier, because I think that's going to be of interest to some of our operator members.
Yeah, it's probably too harsh to say. The lead times we currently experience is due to COVID issues and shipping issues more so than pre-Brexit. I say the process is being more elongated, and we're getting used to it. It's just the new way of doing things, but it's slightly longer and slightly more administrative.
Yeah, excellent. And there's no shift in the kind of the strategic thinking within the group, I guess. I mean, if there's business to be done, there's business to be done. If there's barriers to overcome, you overcome those barriers, and it's a simple, well, if the cost is too high, we won't do it. If it isn't, we'll make some money and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to find a way around these problems and push ahead.
Yeah, and of course you were impacted by that tariff decision of the EU, of course, to charge 25% on imports from the US.
Yes,
resolved huge. In the case of UK. Supporters of Brexit, I'm sure, all cheering as a great example of what we can do outside of the European Union, but it's still going to be an impact because of country of origin rules, I guess.
Yeah,
everything that might come through.
The 25% into Europe, ex-USA, is a huge hammer blow. It just kills deals dead in the water, pretty much. At a time when you really need any business you get, it's just another nail in a bad situation.
Yeah.
So yes, ironically, a good side effect of Brexit has been the fact that the UK has taken a decision to avoid that tariff, and we are tariff free into the UK. Massive help.
Yeah, which is great. Quentin, I mean, you're obviously a UK manufacturer, but you will be sourcing components and parts from different parts of the world. I mean, have you seen any sort of impact of Brexit yet? I mean, obviously, as Justin says, COVID sort of complicates the picture, but is that featured in your business yet?
Well, as you both mentioned, COVID's been a huge hammer blow, and most of the imports and exports for us have all but ceased. As a predominantly a manufacturer supplying the UK market, what we do is we source components from all over the world. So, if things are made in Europe, or whether they're made in Taiwan or South Korea, they're unlikely to shift where they make the goods. So, we've just got to take the pragmatic approach of getting our heads around this bureaucratic burden that's sort of been added to the process now. I would like to say, when we came into the beginning of this year and we were supplying the Netherlands with some products, I was quite surprised to see big global couriers like DHL, DPD stop all packages going into the EU. And that took them some time, a number of 4 or 5 weeks, before we could actually get small components over. I wasn't expecting to see things at that sort of level. I would have thought of global companies, shipping companies would have got their heads around it. But I think we were right down to the wire on the agreement, and it was just before Christmas, and everyone was sort of hanging in the balance. The sort of the preparations that companies like Reflex could have made were quite small, really. I mean, all the government websites pointed to being ready, and yet the details on how to get ready for the outcome was pretty thin. But businesses are pretty resilient, I think. Where there's a will, there's a way. And now that companies like DHL are shipping, finding commodity codes was a little bit difficult in the beginning, but we've got our heads around that. And actually, what we ship is generally the same over and over again. So by the time you've done it a few times, the process does become a lot simpler.
Yes. I mean, I was taking, sad as I am, a look at some of the import-export rules and the forms that have to be completed. I have to say, they did appear very, very daunting. But I guess once you get used to it, and yes, there's a cost. You might have some specialist resource within the business. It will just become part and parcel of the usual business process, presumably.
Yeah, and I think, John, it's worth saying that the companies that are involved in shipping, whether you're shipping machines or whether you're shipping parts, you can get shipping agents or forwarding agents, but a lot of them now they're getting very slick at it as well. So we've shipped a couple of machines to the Netherlands early in the new year, and some more recently, and it was a lot easier the second time round. So things are becoming a little easier, although I don't think we're through the woods yet, and we're not in the normal rhythm of business. We're pretty much close, so a long way to go, I'd say.
Yeah, I have had a question come through, and by the way, everyone, just to remind you that little Q&A button at the bottom of your screens there, just type in your question and we can see it, and I'll put it to the panel. You're not allowed to answer this question, but I thought I'd read it out anyway. Someone's just said, will there be any price rises? So we'll just park that one for the moment from a Competition Act point of view, and I'll let you ask that question directly to your suppliers when the time is right to do so. Thanks for that, Quentin. One of the other things that was quite interesting, I thought, and obviously started to, as you start to read some of this stuff, you don't appreciate, was that actually some of these import and export rules, country of origin, are quite complicated. You need to be aware of those so that you get your declarations right and nothing goes awry at the border. But there's also things like if you were taking a suitcase abroad with some of your products in it, or some samples, or whatever it happens to be, you still have to do your declarations, I believe.
Yeah, if you were flying out to a show, as we've done, well, most people in the industry will go to European shows, some over to the USA. Any European show, if we were going to support a product and we were taking a latest SSD with software on it to update a machine on the stand or before the show started, we just put it in our suitcase, hop on a plane and not think about it. But of course, that isn't the case now. You will have to declare that with a customs form, either in advance or as you go through customs. And I would probably do it in advance to stop any problems. But that's the sort of thing, and bringing things back as well, you know, going over and seeing a distributor and bringing a sample back, or, you know, you have to declare it through the customs process. And of course, we haven't had to consider that for many years. I remember years and years ago having to do it, but that's probably back in the early 90s. So many of us will never have had to even consider that as an issue.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very strange for those of us who are as old as I am. We'll remember the pre-EU days, and yeah, I mean, it's very strange, very, very strange to envisage yourself being in a position that you've not been accustomed to for, you know, 50 odd years.
Even not getting in the EU passport lane, John.
Yeah, that's really my next point, actually, and I think. One of the things I've always thought about Brexit myself was that it really won't hit home to the vast majority of the population until they go on holiday, which of course they haven't been able to do, and have to stand in the non-EU lane. And I think it will be very interesting to see how the British public react to that when they do get the opportunity to travel abroad. But for us, it's important as business people to remember that the rules are different, not just, you know, standing in a different lane, but we have to make sure that we've got passports that are no more than 10 years old. They've got to have at least 6 months to run on them. We've got to make sure we've got the right insurance, and so on and so forth. And you know, I was just thinking, oh well, we've got the Barcelona show coming up in the autumn. Normally, oh, shall I go? So you know, some people probably decide on the weekend before, I'm going to pop out there and just buy a ticket and go. It's not going to be as easy, is it? It's a new world for us, and I think it'll take some settling down. Anyway, look, I'd like to move on to another subject, which I think probably be one of the most relevant to Back to members, and that's the employment of EU staff. We've obviously had quite a good chunk of EU personnel in our workforces. COVID and everything else, Brexit included, has meant that a number of those people have returned home. A number have stayed. We put lots of stuff out, making sure that they've went through the process of getting settled status as best they can. But this could be an issue for us, because if we're looking to draw on the European labour pool, there's a whole new bunch of regulations in place. And I wonder if I could bring Karen in here for a sort of brief introduction of some of the rules, Karen, that apply both for settled status and the points-based immigration system. And if you need to, I'm sure you'll farm it off to your colleagues where necessary.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on the EU settlement scheme, and then David will talk a little bit about some of the other rules that have been brought in post-transition. So the EU settlement scheme was set up for those EEA and Swiss citizens who were here before the end of the transition, which was the 31st of December 2020, to allow them to stay permanently should they wish to make their home here. It was loosely based on the EU regulations, so they could, if they'd already been here for 5 years and met the kind of qualifying eligibility, they would get settled status straight away, which is the same as indefinite leave to remain, which means they could live and work without restrictions. Anybody who'd been here for less than 5 years would be given a UK status, similar to the status they were getting the right to remain under EU law, but that would allow them 5 years. And once they'd been here for 5 years, then they could apply for settled status. And again, pre-settled status would allow them to remain, live and work here as they had, and access services just as they had done under EU law. The scheme's going really well. We've had over 5 million applications already. Even though somebody had to have been living here before the 31st of December, they have until the 30th of June this year to apply, and that's called the grace period. And during this time, we are still getting applications regularly on a daily basis, quite a lot of applications. Yeah, so it is all going very well. But for those EU citizens who arrive after and come to the UK after the 1st of January 2021, they will have to come under the new immigration system, which is called the points-based immigration system. And David can just go through a little bit of the of information about those routes.
Thanks, Karen. Would you mind, David, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to mention a couple more things about the EUSS scheme. So
Thank you.
We've had over 5 million applications so far. So, very, very large labour pool still available. Really important to note that where you've been living in the UK, you can leave the UK for a period and still qualify. So those staff you mentioned that may have sort of gone home during the COVID period, but if they were already here in the UK, there may still be time for them to come back if they have not applied for the settlement scheme prior to June and still apply. So it's absolutely worth them looking to do that. Alongside that, it's really easy to apply for the EU settlement scheme. So we've transformed our IT. You can apply on a mobile phone. You've got a biometric passport. You literally zap it against the passport, complete the form. It's free of charge. It can all be done very, very quickly and easily. And it's quite a step change for how we undertake our various immigration products, and something we're looking to roll out across the rest of our system. So let me talk about that other system. So there's no getting away from it. End of free movement obviously brings in new frictions, new rules and regulations. But we've taken the opportunity to step back and say, actually, we're going to have a single global system, so for all countries, but let's take the opportunity to revise, reform and change that system and simplify it, so make that easier, give more opportunities for recruitment. And the reason I say that is because, yes, you may wish to continue to look at what you can replicate in terms of your recruitment from the EU, but actually we've widened the opportunities for talent globally from other countries that prior to these changes you may not have been able to get people to qualify for. That means you've got a much broader pool in terms of getting that absolute best talent that you think you need. There are some restrictions though, because of course the UK does first and foremost want people to focus on resident labour and looking to encourage investment in that resident labour. But let me talk briefly about the new rules, and I want to touch quickly on sort of short-term versus long-term. So if you're coming in for a short period, so if you say you're EU national, for example, and you come to the UK. Now you go through one of our e-gates. It's not the same as free movement, but you may not realise it, but you're landed as what we call a visitor. So that means you're there for 6 months, and the number of things that you can and can't do. One of the things is that you can't take employment. However, what you can do is you can undertake what we call permitted business activities. There's a whole suite of business activities that you can undertake. Again, we can share this after you. With you afterwards, but I just want to highlight something that I think are particularly relevant for yourselves. So that means you can attend conferences. You can even be a speaker, a one-off conference. There are rules in there. So if you are a company that's supplied equipment and you need to come in to repair that or install that, that can all be done within those with those visitor rules. So again. Have a look at those rules, see what might apply to you. Now, if you're looking to then actually recruit people, that's different, and that's where you would then need to apply under the points-based system. So most people will come under what we call our new skilled worker route, and in order to utilise that, you need to become a registered sponsor. So as a company, you need to apply to the Home Office for a sponsor licence. There's a fee attached to that. There's about an 8-week lead time to become a sponsor. Once you have a sponsor licence, that lasts for 4 years. So if you think that's something that you might look to do, we would encourage you to do that in advance of your recruitment, so it doesn't hold up said recruitment. Once you have got a sponsor license, you can then use our new skilled worker route. So you look to sponsor someone. So you initially through this a login you're given, you can apply to the Home Office for what we call a certificate of sponsorship. And it probably takes about 24 hours working hours to turn around. And then you can sponsor an individual, but you can only sponsor them what we call eligible occupations. So these are jobs what we call RQF level 3. So it's about skill levels of A level and above, and you have to then pay them an appropriate salary. So that's either our general salary threshold, that's £25,600, or the going rate for the job, whichever is higher. And the going rate for the job isn't based on the on the lowest 25th percentile based on the Office for National Statistics, what we call ASH data. It's an annual survey for household earnings. So again, they're available online and you can see those tables. But we recognise maybe times where actually it's appropriate to have a lower salary from that, and that's where the points of the points-based system comes in terms of our tradable points. So if, for example, you're looking to employ someone who's on the shortage occupation list, you can then get a 20% discount on that general salary threshold and that going rate. If you're looking to bring in what we call new entrants, so that's someone who's under the age of 26, starting out in their career, you wouldn't expect them to have progressed all the way through a salary scale in that period, or they could be they're working towards professional qualifications in the particular area they're looking at. So they will get up to a 30% discount on the going rate, up to the sort of lower end of our threshold, 20,480. And someone can be classed as a new entrant up to 4 years, which is, again, it's much more generous than our old rules, which was around 3 years and much higher salary scales. To put this into perspective, before we made these changes, the skill level for jobs was set at degree level or above. So again, we've widened that. In addition, it was announced yesterday by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the budget that we're going to be looking to some additional reforms to our global talent and innovator visas. Also going to do some additional reforms to introduce a new global mobility visa. Now, within the points-based system, we already have what we call intra-company transfer visa. So if you're a sort of large multinational company or any company that's sort of got an international presence, and you've got a branch or subsidiary in the UK, and you want to move skilled people from one to the other, again, there are options to do that within the system. They tend to be set at more senior level, but there are less restrictions. So, for example, they aren't required to speak English at a particular level. If they come to the UK, it could be that it's temporary, but you want them to become permanent. In the past, that wasn't allowed, and they had to leave the UK for at least 12 months. Now they can switch into that skilled worker visa if they choose to do so. The other thing that was announced by the Chancellor was we're going to introduce a new unsponsored route for top tier talent, and again that will be coming in over the next over the next couple of years. So, I mean, there's all sorts of detail around this. So I thought that gives you a flavour of what's available.
Thank you very much, David. And as you say, there's lots and lots of detail on that. I will send out after this webinar to everyone just a few of the links that are available to take you through the detail. They then, for example, will take you through to the online form to become a registered employer, so that you can sponsor people to come from abroad. It looks on the face of it, and I have no experience of this personally, but it looks on the face of it, David, to be a relatively straightforward process to get your place in, get yourself in the place where you can recruit. But I think my question to you on behalf of members will be, well, look, you know, certainly for, let's say, our arcade opera, both seaside and inland, they may be employing people who are going to be on salaries which are de facto less than £20,000. The job itself, you know, just on the floor is going to be a kind of customer relations job, but it's not probably going to be an RQF3 level job.
Yeah.
Are we saying that you cannot access the global labour pool if you have jobs that sit in that sort of group of fairly junior roles?
That's correct. So that is one of the consequences from the end of free movement. It's certainly the government's position that we're looking to invest in resident labour as much as possible.
Yeah.
As we know, many people across the country are facing an uncertain future in their jobs as a result of COVID, particularly when we get to the end of the furlough scheme. So we don't know what unemployment levels are going to look like, and this is an area that we're looking at very closely and very carefully. And there's a lot of work going on across government with the to look at upskilling across the piece. How do we encourage individuals to come into many of these jobs that may previously have been filled from Europe? So it's something that absolutely, I think, those conversations need to continue. So the position is you need to look and recruit and train. We're in the UK, you should start doing that. but we need to monitor that situation carefully and look at where government can help support where appropriate.
Yeah, okay, well, that's very clear. Thank you. And within, just one final question, David, within your sort of government analysis of the global workforce, was there any sort of predictions or forecasts about how that labour market might shift? You know, are you expecting to see, you know, more people coming from, you know, let's say the US or India or China, and a reduction in the number of people coming from the EU, or is there a prediction that it might just remain more or less the same?
No, so we do expect. I say we do expect. I think COVID changes everything in terms of, so prior to COVID, yeah. So we would expect an increase in immigration flows from non-EEA countries. By definition, you've opened things up, and obviously a decrease from EU. The overall net result, we would still expect to see an overall decrease in immigration as a whole. Hence, again, we need to look at the focus on labour. But at the more skilled level, again, we think there's lots of opportunities there. I mean, it's well publicised. India are very interested in looking at the number of visas available. So again, you'd expect higher take up from India. But of course, coronavirus is going to change behaviours, what people are looking to do moving forward. There is, it can be competitive in recruiting individuals, and what becomes interesting is actually, you could have a very successful rollout of the vaccine. If we get to a position where we've recovered earlier than others, then in terms of opportunities to recruit and get that best talent, it does put the UK in a good position to recruit that talent, whereas other countries may be in a position where they can't get talent in because they've still got XYZ restrictions in place. So it's all a movable feast, but it is worth thinking about your long-term planning. If the particular skills you're looking to get in, there may be some opportunities over the next year or so.
Thank you, Dave. That's very helpful. And this conversation prompted by a question from Steve Ambrose. Thanks, Steve, for that. It's very good. And perhaps just continuing on this theme, Kieran, I mean, again, from a European perspective, the UK was always a very attractive place for people from Europe to go and work. Well, certainly, post the 1980s and boys from the Auf Wiedersehen Pet and all that stuff, when we have workers going to Germany. But what do you detect within the European Union now, particularly amongst the young people? Is there a lessening of an appetite to come and visit and work and stay in the UK post Brexit, do you think?
I mean, it's probably too early to tell, John. I mean, I think obviously the process of Brexit has sent out, I suppose, an unfortunate message, I guess, to the rest of Europe, that to some extent, there is, as we were talking about before, there is this kind of departure or parting of ways, and therefore, it's perhaps a less accommodating place for some of those young people. As I said, I think that's probably a misunderstanding of a kind of media narrative, and not necessarily the reality. But I suppose that is a potential unfortunate consequence of the last couple of years of, at times, kind of acrimonious discussion between the EU and the UK. I think over time, there will be some kind of an adjustment in terms of sentiment. The reality is, of course, practically speaking, yes, it's now much more difficult to both for UK citizens to settle and work in Europe on a fairly flexible basis, and vice versa. And so, to some extent, that is a loss for both parties. I think if you're a UK business and the types of roles you're describing earlier as well, John, access to EU labour has been very advantageous. And I suppose now, to a certain extent, businesses in the UK are expected now to step in and fill that gap a little bit themselves by skilling people up in order to fill those jobs. I think that's, businesses will probably certainly feel that. I think that's that's the reality.
And Justin, Quentin, as employers in the UK, I mean, what are your thoughts and what analysis have you done about your future labour pool? Justin, has this been an issue for Sega?
It's not an issue particularly. No, most of our staff, so seasonal doesn't really apply to us. Our operations are non-seasonal. So we're not in that sort of ebb and flow of hiring each season. We're operation 12 months a year, so that's not really an issue. Our manufacturing plant in South Wales, we recruit locally from the local population and always have done. It's a very good workforce down there, and head office in London. It's primarily those who have European origins have got their permits in place. It's not an issue for us currently. We don't foresee it an issue particularly, I have to say.
What about you, Quentin?
Yeah, we're pretty similar to Justin, actually. Most of the people we have, well, all the people we have are full-time. We're not seasonal. And the Eastern Europeans that we have in the business are all very good, very experienced now, with us, probably been around us for 5, 6, 7 years. So, the key for us to make sure that they did get the settled status, they knew how to get the settled status, and then we could ensure that they weren't going to run into trouble, and neither were we going forwards. As we go forwards now, I mean, software resource is something that we were struggling a little bit with in the UK, mainly because we're in a regional town, Newark, and a lot of people who are in software jobs want to be A, in London, or B, in Manchester or Birmingham, and so the Eastern European pool was always interesting to us, because you had people who were prepared to come and live in smaller towns and cities. So I don't know how that's going to roll out for us forward. It's not a current issue because we're not able to sort of trade normally, but going forward, we're going to have to be very alive to that.
Yes, I think absolutely right. Absolutely right. And obviously, COVID-19 has just changed every consideration that we've made about absolutely everything. And maybe we need to repeat this seminar in 12 months' time when things are hopefully a bit more normal, and we can see how the consequences of Brexit have flowed out in reality, and adjust our perspectives accordingly. I've got an anonymous attendee. I don't know, Karen, how we've got an anonymous attendee, but they've asked where the fruit pickers are coming from. Totally irrelevant to our particular sector, but
happy to pick it up. So
there's a special scheme, I believe, David, for fruit pickers.
Yes, we do have a pilot scheme running, our seasonal workers pilot for agricultural workers.
Yes.
So we ran the pilot last year. It was decided to extend it by an additional year, and to extend the number of visas that were applicable to it. So it covers 10,000 visas. I mean, interestingly, obviously in 2020, we had, because of all the disruption for COVID, we actually didn't get many overseas workers coming, and we didn't starve, so we did manage to find a way through it. It was challenging, but it certainly was possible. So we've got this pilot. We're going to evaluate it. We're going to see what that comes out at. Of course, the government, I think, understands that there are particular challenges in this sector. Our overall aim, of course, is still to look to utilise resident workers where possible, and we'll see how that falls out in terms of that evaluation of that scheme.
Just one other question while you're speaking, David, before I move on. And one of the other things about the points-based immigration system is that certain elements of it are tradable, aren't they?
Yeah.
You can sort of, in terms of accumulating your points, you can, I can't remember exactly what it was, but you can sort of be slightly less on one element of it if you can boost the qualifications, for example, on another element of it to earn a few more points there.
Yeah, so I was touching on this earlier. So within the skilled worker route, specifically, we have tradable points for different characteristics. So those characteristics are whether job is on the shortage occupation list, whether you are classed as what we call new entrant to the labour market, was one I mentioned. There's another one for if you have a PhD that's relevant to your job, and then in particular whether it's in a STEM subject. So a good example there's like a lab technician.
Yes.
So they don't traditionally earn high levels of money, but they're very highly skilled. So that's what we have there. Then what the Chancellor announced is that we will now have an additional, for very highly skilled people, points-based route that will be unsponsored, which we're developing at the moment, and we'll be putting out more information in due course. And we're considering again what tradable points there might be and what might take place in that system.
And I think I'm right in saying is one of the non-tradable elements of the points-based system is a fundamental qualification, is the ability to speak English to a certain level. I just wonder what that level was. I mean,
yes, so that's level B1. So that's the of the Common European Framework for English language. So in layman's terms, that's the equivalent of an A level.
Right. So same. Yeah.
In English. As mentioned before, though, if you the intra-company transfer route, So if you're a company that's looking to bring people sort of back and forth, that doesn't have an English language requirement. So one of the things we're starting to see is some multinational companies are looking to bring their skills in because they're already part of that company on the intercompany transfer route, learn English while they're in the UK, and then switch across to the skilled work route. And again, that's perfectly viable.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, David. Well, look, we're moving into the last part of the webinar now, and I'd like to just pick up on a few of the questions that are coming in. They're sort of from all sort of different perspectives, and not necessarily directly relevant to the amusement machine sector. But does anyone have a view on an international vaccination passport? And we've got COVID-19. Is this, and I'm particularly looking at Home Office colleagues here, is this something you're able to speak about? Because I know I can't, other than what I've read in the paper.
Yeah, so obviously from a policy perspective, there's a review that's being undertaken. So I think Michael Gove, it's been well published, is undertaking that review to see what the government's position on that will be, and that will be published in due course. I think the only thing I would say is that obviously each individual country or block of countries, an example of the EU, has the power to introduce restrictions on other countries. For example, today we require certain countries to have people coming from certain countries to have a TB certificate. That exists. So the concept that someone might need to be vaccinated to enter a particular country isn't new. You might find that if you go on holiday in certain countries, you have to have a yellow fever vaccination. So that isn't new. What individual countries might choose to do is unknown at this stage, and what the UK might choose to do, we're going to have to wait and see what comes out from the government review.
I can just add to that, John, if you want, from an EU perspective, because there's going to be a legislative proposal in a couple of weeks for a vaccine passport from the Commission. That is all with a view to try and get tourism going this summer in Europe. So there is actually a bit of a push from Southern European countries in particular, who are keen to see the UK somehow integrated into that, because they're keen to see British tourists come to the beaches in Greece this summer. But the problem there's a couple of problems with it. First is kind of certain fundamental rights issues, also certain practical problems. You may have noticed from the media this week, for example, that the Hungarian government has approved the Chinese vaccine, which is not approved anywhere else in Europe. So, that's another particular issue that would have to be dealt with in a proposal like that. But the other point that David made, it's not going to change the ability for national governments to impose other restrictions on people. So irrespective of whether you have a COVID passport, you could well still find yourself having to quarantine for 14 days when you enter a particular country this summer, depending on the rules. So it can solve some things, but it can't solve all the issues, obviously, around movement and COVID.
Thank you. Quentin and Justin, on a slightly allied point, actually, because I thought this was a really interesting question that was debated in the media a few weeks ago in the UK, was whether or not you as an employer would or could insist on a member of your staff having a vaccine. There's obviously this big talk about anti-vaxxers, and some people have in my view, totally bizarre and strange attitude towards having a vaccine. Do you have policies on this at all? Justin?
We certainly started the conversation internally about the voluntary or non-voluntary rights on vaccines. So the conversation has started. It's not concluded, but yes, it has started. Something to consider.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Same for you, Quentin, is it?
Yeah, we're a relatively small business, so we're talking to each other, and people are asking, have you had the letter yet? Some of the older members of staff. There's no discussion here about enforcing any sort of rules around how you come back to work if you've had a vaccine. However, I'd as an employer be very interested to sit down with any member of staff who wasn't looking to have a vaccine, that was eligible to have a vaccine, because I think we have a duty to make sure that everyone's as cared for and protected as possible. Whether or not it's enforceable, I don't know, but I'd certainly be interested to make sure that all our guys have got the vaccine if they've been offered it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Quentin. I think, I still find it, and it's a very personal view, I find it bizarre that anybody who works in a care home, for example, would not be forced almost to have a vaccine before they were permitted to come to work. Whether or not that had there was some legal basis for that, I really don't know. I guess that's the debate. But yeah, very, very strange times we live in, isn't it? Look, I've got one other question here from, which is a kind of one that you may or may not be able to answer, guys, from Martin Agabeg from NSM. Makes a very good point, actually. You know, there are operations that are transborder, and one of those is going to be data transfer between Europe and the UK. And in his particular case, it's going to be on a regular basis as you're updating music. Is anybody, again, I'm probably turning to you, David, and your colleagues, aware of anything around the data issues post Brexit?
It certainly is not something that would be covered by the Home Office, because we would look at immigration rather than the data per se.
But I do know that that's something that DCMS deal with and look at. I'm imagining there is something on there on gov.uk under their pages, because they're one of the things that they have worked quite heavily on for a good year. I know they were doing it well before the first date we had for leaving was about transferring data backwards and forwards with the EU. So first port of call I would suggest would be to the gov.uk pages. And
I can try and answer if you want, John. And well, Martin, if
could you also perhaps just expand it out into sort of broader GDPR issues as well? We touched on that at the very beginning. I think people will be interested to know if there's any implications there.
So indeed, if I can't answer it entirely, Martin, you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly at Euromat, and we can try and answer any supplementary questions. So basically, its adequacy decision, has enabled the free flow of personal data between the UK and the EU. So that in the short term will mean that there's a kind of status quo there. On kind of non-personal data transfers, well, the only thing that might change post-Brexit, and I suppose slight depends also perhaps to the country in which you're transferring data, is in Europe, there does exist some localization requirements for certain categories of data. I've no idea whether or not that would apply to the data that you're transferring. Sometimes those localization restrictions are fine to maintain data within Europe, but may pose some restrictions from outside Europe. So I think it very much depends on the type of data that you are transferring. But normally those localization restrictions will apply to some very kind of sensitive types of data. And I suspect probably what you're transferring, it's not the case there. Generally, in terms of sort of personal data flows in the future, they will be maintained as long as there is a high degree of regulatory alignment between the UK and the EU. There is a kind of lingering uncertainty about the future of data transfers between the EU and the UK, because when the UK was a member of the EU, there is an exemption for the collection of data by the security services for EU members. UK is now outside. I'm guessing probably the UK probably will continue to do that under UK law, and there is plenty of commentary suggesting that may leave space in the future for some kind of challenge to the adequacy decision that currently has just been put in place. So it's the reality that data transfers generally globally between the EU and third countries have been subject to a lot of legal uncertainty over the course of the last couple of years. You've probably heard of the name Max Schrems, but he has been running he's an Austrian privacy activist that has run a number of legal cases which have challenged the privacy shield between the EU and US, which was a data transfer mechanism, and that's still massively uncertain. So adequacy decisions themselves give a level of certainty, but they can be uncertain, as I mentioned earlier, because they can be unilaterally withdrawn, but they can also be subject to this kind of legal challenge, which may undermine their basis in the first place. So I think data is certainly an area to watch in the future. If you are transferring data across borders, keep a good abreast of what's going on, not just from a regulatory point of view, but from a legal point of view, as it's an area where there's a huge amount of kind of legal activism to try and challenge the status quo on various bases.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. I mean, in Martin's case, it's not personal data so much as some music files and so on and things that are going across. But again, I think it's probably one of those things, Martin, that we need to do a little bit of a deep dive to be absolutely sure we understand all the rules. I'm not sure that they are going to apply in any negative way towards you. I would hope not anyway, but let's have a look at that and see what we can find out. I've got a question from Sam here. If I read it out, because it's a relatively long one, I'm not sure I can summarize. We're getting mixed responses from shipping agents and organisations regarding country of origin of machines and the shipping processes involved, especially regarding how the refurbishing of used machines in the UK, especially those with an original country of origin in the US, impacts upon tariffs when exporting into the EU. So we've got this issue around the tariffs again. I don't know, maybe you've looked at this a little bit more, Justin. I was looking at the country of origin rules myself the day before yesterday, and I mean, they're not easy to follow, let's put it that way. And you're on mute, Justin.
Ironically, I've got a meeting at 12:30 on that exact subject of declaration of conformity, certificate of origin, and the final rules of understanding it in more detail. I think the other part of that question was about refurbished machines and country of origin.
Yes.
So I'm guessing the question is asking about ex-USA machines that are refurbished here and sold into Europe potentially, as we're experiencing. We've got 2 test cases running of games that are prior to that November the 7th date when the rules changed, and testing the situation of claiming that money back, or the customer claiming that money back. So again, it would help us sell machines that are older than November the 7th into Europe. I'm happy to share that information once I receive the results of those test cases with yourself or the person who answered the question.
That would be very helpful, Justin. I mean, one of the things that I did sort of take away when I was looking at those country of origin rules is almost like on a case-by-case basis, because it's the amount of effectively refurbishing or reprocessing or replacing that you do that is going to determine whether it's been processed enough in the UK to determine whether it's a UK origin product rather than where it perhaps might have come from. And I would direct you, Sam, to the relevant website on that. I can't remember the link off the top of my head, but there's a very good sort of document there that takes you through a whole series of examples of where products have been or been through some process in the UK and the impact that has on their country of origin for import-export purposes. But a good question, Nat. Thank you very much. Look, we're coming towards the end of the webinar today. Unless anyone can fire in a very quick question that we can answer very, very quickly, I'm going to close with a sort of request for a one-word answer from each of our panelists. And you're going to have to fire around this pretty quickly. And that's simply this. Do you think the UK will re-enter the European Union at some point in the future? And I'm going to come to you, Kieran, last, but also Quentin?
I haven't given that any consideration. My one-word
not a one-word answer.
Would be no.
Karen?
I think yes, in the distant future.
Yeah. Kenny, you get an opportunity to speak. Yes or no?
Oh,
he's gone. David?
On mute. It's more than one word, but I think we will always go with whatever the will of the people is in the future, whatever that might be.
Be a politician, David. Justin?
In my lifetime, yes.
Yeah. Kieran, from your perspective, no.
I'm not optimistic, John. No.
Well, I think I'm in the very long term. I think our interests will at some point be allied with Europe again, but I wouldn't like to put a time scale on it. Look, thanks very much, everyone. I do appreciate it. We've had one final question. I've got 2 minutes, David Lucas, talking about the Gambling Commission. Is it necessary to obtain reports from foreign police forces? And will Brexit cause any difficulty delay in obtaining this information? I don't know the answer to that question, David. I don't know if anybody on the panel might. It may be one that we just need to take offline and have a chat about, because it's a very important question. Could be some implications for the UK, but I've not really considered that, to be fair. Anyway, look, thank you to everyone who's attended today's webinar. Next week at the same time, same place, 10:30, we'll be doing the second of this series of webinars on the Gambling Act review. And what I want to do is to take members through the position that BACTA currently has in response to that review, and give you an opportunity, and I will send our document out beforehand, give you an opportunity to quiz myself, our President James and Vice President Greg on the contents of that particular document, answer any questions, and indeed and take any good ideas that members might have of what we might like to put in there before the submission date of the 31st of March. And the following Thursday, at same place, same time at 10:30, our webinar is on reopening, and we'll have all the chairmen of our 4 divisions as panelists discussing what we need to be doing to make sure that we are ready to open on May the 17th, and how we can benefit from the reopening in the best possible way. I'm sure we're all planning desperately at the moment for that particular date, and I think it'd be really interesting to talk it through with operators across our 4 divisions. So we've come to 11:30. It only remains for me now to thank our panelists, Quentin, Karen, Kenny, David, Justin and Kieran. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your busy days to speak with us today. It's been really, really interesting morning, actually. It's recast some of my thinking about the consequences of Brexit, and I hope members have been able to take away quite a lot of information. We will follow it up with more communication with you guys. Lots of links through to the various pages on the government website that it's well worth looking through. It may not apply to you, but just being familiar with it will help you understand if it is. So thank you for attending, and thank you again to our panelists, and a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, John.
Thanks, John.